Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by Syngenta Canada, Alberta Wheat Commission, and C&M Seeds.
Jamie Larsen, research scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in Lethbridge. So winter durum wheat currently doesn't exist in Western Canada. It's something that we thought would be interesting to develop for several reasons. One definite reason was, the benefits of winter cereals in rotations. And because winter durum is grown in other places of the world, we thought we'd give it a try and take a look at it. Some of the aspects that we're really most concerned about right now is winter survival, so we're really starting to try to build in some cold tolerance into that. We're using, as parents, we're using winter bred wheat sourced from Western Canadian winter wheat breeding programs, so ones that existed in Saskatchewan at the U of S, but then also here in Lethbridge. We're also trying to incorporate fusarium head blight resistance into that material. That's one of the major challenges in spring durum right now. The idea behind winter durum, if we can build in that cold tolerance, is it provides another crop, a high value crop, a durum crop, that basically may avoid some of the fusarium head blight risk just by flowering earlier. So typically when it flowers, it'll be a bit cooler. It doesn't meet necessarily the criteria that are required for really high levels of fusarium head blight infection. So it'll just avoid it. So it's a way for farmers to have a durum crop that they can get the value from, but lower the fusarium head blight risk.
And what sort of, what other diseases are you looking to make it resistant to?
So there's a number of diseases that we're actively breeding for in winter durum. The two biggest ones certainly is, the biggest one is fusarium head blight. The idea behind this crop is that basically it's fusarium head blight, or avoids fusarium head blight. Like spring durum typically gets more of it, so this will flower earlier and there'll be a less chance of getting fusarium head blight in the crop. So we're going to work on that, try to breed in resistance from winter wheat sources, as well as using all of kind of the material that shows a little lesser or a little less fusarium head blight susceptibility, so we're crossing with that material. But in southern Alberta, an important disease is stripe rust. What we've noticed with this material that we brought in is typically there is some lines that are resistant to stripe rust, but they do get it. One of the calling cards for spring durum is that it's stripe rust resistant, so we're trying to incorporate that in. But as we build the program, we're of course going to work on other things like leaf rust, stem rust, bunt, leaf spots, all those kind of diseases to make the full package, to make it a robust germplasm base that we can develop material that's really resistant. That's the job of a breeder. Yeah. And
in a dry year like we've seen in some areas this year, how would that have changed if we have winter durum?
Well, so that's the real calling card for winter cereals, right? Is they are planted in the fall. If you can get them in, they make use of the fall moisture, winter moisture, and then the early spring moisture. If you look at the typical rainfall patterns in the prairies, right, it's kind of dry, and then you'll get moisture typically in May and June. And so that's perfectly timed for winter cereals to make use of that moisture. So you'll typically, if you get that typical moisture pattern, you'll get pretty decent yields off that stuff. If you have to seed later, maybe wait for the moisture to leave the field and you seed a spring crop, certainly there is a moisture stress level that can be seen, and I think we're seeing some of that this year, right, with the drought effects across Western Canada. So.
And what does the cold tolerance look like with it?
So the cold tolerance in winter durums, that's certainly a challenge. Most of this material was developed in areas that aren't like Western Canada. We're kind of on the frontier for winter wheat production, I guess you could say. So our varieties are renowned for their level of cold tolerance. So when we source material from the US, Europe, areas of Russia and so on and so forth, Ukraine, they don't see the winter stress like we have. So what we see typically is there are some lines that are fairly cold tolerant, but not at the level that's acceptable really for winter wheat. So what we're doing is we're crossing with a lot of winter wheat that were developed in Western Canada, material that was from Brian Fowler's program, but Rob Graff's program especially. We're crossing with that material to try to bring in that cold tolerance from winter bred wheat and put it into winter durum. If we get there, then we've got that we know that we can do this, then we start working on other aspects like quality and other things like that. So.
And what's the eventual objective of this? Like, are you wanting to sell it as its own class?
So I'm going to leave that to everybody else to decide. My idea is we'd love to kind of get towards a spring durum quality, but in winter wheat, that's really challenging, what we know, right? Winter bred wheat. So for this, we hope to get to that. Ultimately, we'll see. I don't have that answer, and we'll leave it up then to, you know, other people further down the quality chain that will make that decision.
Yeah, for sure. And how does the yield potential compare to spring durum?
So we don't have that direct comparison side by side, but what we do have is a comparison to winter wheat. And we know that winter wheat typically yields 15 to 20% more than spring wheat. That's the average, right? So what we know is this material that we have, which is really not adapted to Western Canada, that we're just kind of growing, that we know it yields within the range of winter wheat. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse, but it's in that range. So I think with progress we make by breeding, we can get there. So we could have those advantages, those yield advantages that winter wheat sees over spring wheat.